So thanks everybody for coming to see Susan Conley, who I don't really need to introduce, but here she is. And thank you for joining on Zoom as well. So this is the hybrid program. So we've got people in the room, people on Zoom, people everywhere. Feel free to get some snacks, and thanks to the third Thursday, right? Third Thursday Book Club for providing snacks and initiating this event. And with no further ado,
Okay.
take it away.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Patent Free Library. I came here as a child all the time. It wasn't quite as nice as this in the 70s. So this is a very unique reading for me tonight because it's a nostalgia trip. It's a pure nostalgia trip. So you'll forgive me if I do a little bit of that. Like when I was young, we would come here, we would work downstairs. I would first at Bath Junior High and then more because I had grown up in Woolwich. So I grew up across the river. My father is from Bath, but I was raised in Woolwich, my brother and my sister. So we would do our homework here, and then we would race over to the Y, right across the street, which is now been taken down for whatever swim class or gymnastics was big then. I was really bad at gymnastics, but it was and then there was free gym, and then we would just race back and do more homework, and we were constantly buying candy at the Y. I remember that for a quarter. So okay, I'll stop. But there's actually some consequence to why I am telling you this, in the sense that a lot of this book orbits this part of the world. Surprise. I know I would say at least probably half of you have read it and half of you haven't, is the feeling I'm getting. That's really fun. And thank you, Martha, enormously for initiating this. It was really sweet and exciting to come back. Martha and my father's family go way back, so we could do many generations there. I told Martha and Hannah that we can make this very conversational and fluid today. I've done a whole lot of events with this book, and I'm very able to sort of tap dance. So I have a feeling there'll be more questions and answers than normal because it's a book club event. Book clubs usually have a lot of good questions. So I'll tell you a little bit about how this book came to be, and then maybe I'll read a little bit, just a little, and then we can just see where we go with the questions. Yeah, how does that sound? Yes. Great. It's actually kind of an auspicious day. I think Terry knows this. Mockingbird Books is here, my second favorite bookstore, except for the bookstore in Portland that I sort of is my bookstore that I launch at, named Print, but I love Mockingbird Books. So thank you, Terry, for coming. But this book grew out, I think technically this is my fifth book. I've written a variety of things, including one hybrid book that was prose, poetry, micro stories, and photography. So I collaborated with a really wonderful photographer. But this book had been sitting in my imagination for a long time. It's hard to write about where you're from. And I wanted to write about where I was from. And I wanted to honor it and celebrate it. And also look at the challenges that it was facing and is facing. And I couldn't figure out how to do it. I wanted to write about Bath and Pittsburgh, where I have also spent an enormous amount of time. My parents got an old cottage from the 1880s there almost 50 years ago. So in a lot of ways, that cottage is like my home. We don't live in Woolwich anymore. I've lived all around the country and spent many years 3 years in China. I lived a long time in California, a long time in Boston, but Pittsburgh was always home. But Pittsburgh has changed a lot. And so I couldn't figure out how to do it. And I actually considered writing a memoir, or not a memoir, I should say. I was going to write sort of literary journalism, a story of what's happened to West Point Village, is my idea, which is right next to where I essentially grew up. And I did some research and I imagined what that story would be, and it was just such a terrible story. It was just not a story that anyone was going to want to read. There was no happy ending in my mind. And where did the trawlers go? My story was, where did all the trawlers go? Because there was a fleet, like 10 of them in the gut between Janice Wright's house on Burncoat Island, and Janice is here tonight, which is so exciting. She's like a celebrity. Like, she's my celebrity person. Because a lot of this book is fictionalizing Janice's island. So she's a dear, dear old friend, but she hasn't been to a reading yet. So this is really special, really special. I thought, well, maybe I fictionalize it. Maybe I write a fictional story about a woman who's possibly married to a fisherman, and then it was, oh, where will she live? Where will I put her? How will she know? I'll put her on Burncoat Island. And I'll name it I fictionalize all the names, right? But if you're from here, you know that Sewell is sort of kind of that, right? Kind of. And I want to talk about this in a few minutes, how that's been for you, Bath folks and people that live around the coast. I really find it liberating as a writer, because then we're not so beholden to like, wait, the bank's there and the gas station's there, you got that wrong, wait. And then people get all hung up. So what I like to do is just like, let's just loosen it a little, fictionalize it a little, and then we'll have a little bit of room to imagine, move around. Because this is not historical fiction, at all. So that was super, super intentional. There's a village in this book, Sewell Village, that is an amalgamation of a couple of villages. I mean, it's sort of like if you took Westlake Village and you kind of mushed it with Spasco Village, you sort of have different components of it that were emotionally true to me. So again, kind of you see what a fiction writer will do in our minds. So I landed on fiction, and I thought, now I have my vehicle. Now I can tell this story that I want to tell about this Maine that I grew up in that's changing. And I can kind of say some things that I most want to say about it. And I won't be polemical, and I won't be sort of just me on my soapbox in a memoir, right? I'm going to lure people in through fiction. And then I'm going to slide in as much as I can about like the commercial fishing industry and its collapse, and these things that actually really matter to me, and are like the heartbeat of Maine. And a lot of folks don't seem to know or ask the questions. Oh, there are really very few fishing trawlers left. Wonder where they went. So I tried to be very assiduous to the facts in that regard. I did a lot of research. In fact, I talked to my friend Brian Kevin, who's the editor of Down East Magazine. I didn't have to talk him into it very hard, but I said, what if I did a feature story on commercial fishing in Maine? So then I got to go interview commercial fishermen, and then I used a lot of that research. I talked to a lot of other experts in the state about that. So there's our place and our sort of context. But at the heart of this book, I think that the heartbeat of this book is a question. Can a mother not lose emotionally and physically, not lose her children? And in particular, can this mother not lose his two boys? I was very interested in examining, interrogating what I would call boyland, and unpacking, turning on its head a lot of the mythology around hypermasculinization of boys. And this idea that boys, there's so many tropes about boys out there, right? So I just had a lot of fun unpacking them and showing this like much more emotive side of boys in this book. Even though there's two boys, two wolves, if you will, and one of the wolves is pretty abrasive at times. He doesn't want to be emotional, but he can't help it. That was a great treat of the book. In fact, I have said goodbye to one wolf. He's gone off to college. He's a freshman, and I'm saying a huge goodbye to the other wolf. my wolves. I'm really outing myself here. On Friday, he's going away for 10 months, leaving the country. And I thought to myself today, and I have a dear friend in the audience who's also a writer. I try not to look at her too much. But I thought to myself, this is the kind of thing she and I talk about. We talk about our writing so much together. I realized that I wrote this book because I knew this day was coming, where they were going to leave, like really significantly leave. I'll try not to cry. And this is like it's like my testament. Oh, I didn't know it is a really intense time when you're packing up someone to leave for 10 months. He leaves Friday. Did I say that? He's going to England. And I'm so glad I have this book because it's fiction. I will remind us all, it's fiction, but there are so many emotional truths in it about the incredible big-heartedness of boys and then the humor. And the biting, cutting humor towards the mother. So how's that? How's that for an intro? Okay. All right. That's enough of me talking. I have never almost cried in an intro. I am delusionally tired. Not a lot on my mind. Okay, so I'm going to read a tiny bit to just ground us in this book. And I have to say that I was so inspired by this Rick Moody quote that I always have to read it. I sort of took a little chunk of it's a short story. It's this big. It's just a block of short story. And it's called Boys. And I probably read it 15 years ago. And I've always loved it so much. And once I had the boys. And it's meant to be read with great dry humor and irony. Boys enter the house. Boys enter the house. Boys, and with them the idea of boys. Ideas leaden, reductive, inflexible. Enter the house. Boys enter the house speaking nonsense. Boys enter the house calling the mother. And I obviously just took an excerpt, but you get the idea. And then the second quote that opens the book is, "Yes, I am home again, but home has changed." And that is from May Sarton, Letters from Maine, which is a beautiful book and a kind of a bedrock memoir for me. And I remember reading her in graduate school, I think, and thinking, oh my God, there's someone else that, like, all I wanted to do was sit on the coast of Maine and like write stories about the coast of Maine, and she was doing it. And it was very inspiring to me. So this opening chapter, I think, is kind of a good one, just to give you the tone of the book. Because really, if the book is successful, you'd think it was a little bit funny at times. It actually is meant to be funny. There are a lot of hard things that happen, but there's a lot of humor. I would argue. I'll be curious what you think. Okay, it's late afternoon at the end of a long October when the Fleetwood Mac song comes on, and I have to say, this is right out of my life. That we have a joke in my family. I obviously grew up here in this town, but we have a joke that you can't listen to the radio in Maine for longer, like in the car, any ride, you're going to hear Fleetwood Mac. You just are. And it's a joke. So we'll have a joke. Like, do you think we won't hear Fleetwood Mac? Oh, there's a Fleetwood Mac song. And I like Fleetwood Mac. And I literally grew up in Fleetwood Mac. Like, my parents had all the albums, you know, I can do every song, every lyric. And sure enough, I'll tell you how this scene came about, but you can guess that I was listening to Fleetwood Mac. It's late afternoon at the end of a long October when the Fleetwood Mac song comes on. We're halfway down the peninsula, and I tell the wolves, I was raised on Stevie Nicks, so could they please let me listen to the whole thing? Because Sam, the younger one, has a bad habit of changing the station. Mom, he says in his deadpan and stares out the cracked windshield, I already knew that about you growing up on Stevie Nicks. He's 16 and gangly with poking collarbones like little car door handles. He wants to be a professional basketball player, but will settle for rock musician. His face is grown long and gone, so he doesn't look like himself, but the person he's in the process of becoming. You know that look, that long gone teenage boy look. I tell myself it's a beautiful face. It's important to tell myself many things about teenage boys are beautiful, so I don't panic. The song's about a woman who climbs a mountain at the end of a love affair and sees her reflection in the snow-covered hills and becomes less afraid. It's in a challenging register for me, so I'm almost crowing while I sing. But for many months, I've wanted to be less afraid. And for a moment, I feel like Stevie Nicks is a close friend, like she knows me. Every time I turn on the radio, Sam says in his most sarcastic voice, "It's Stevie, the good witch of the West Nicks." And the thing is, Mom, I don't want to grow up in Maine on Fleetwood Mac like you did. His hair is the color of straw and hangs below his ears, and I can't tell if the hair is a joke or a bad fashion statement that involves rarely washing it. But I grin at him and move my head to the beat because at least he's speaking. Sometimes my son's silence in the car is flammable. Charlie's in the back seat. He's our moral police, 17 going on something like 33. He thinks sports are a hoax and believes in the laws of physics, and a senior named Lucy who recently moved to Maine from Bermuda. He's taller and sturdier than Sam and has my husband's dark, wavy hair that doesn't move even in high winds. I am trying not to think about my husband. He's renowned on the peninsula for his gargantuan energy and for being a fisherman who doesn't come home empty-handed. 10 days ago, his boat exploded off of George's Bank, and he broke his right femur and was airlifted to a hospital in Nova Scotia. I'm not allowed to talk to the boys about how much I miss him. I'm not allowed to talk to the boys about my dread or my worry or any of my emotions really. This is because the boys aren't emotional. It's just that no outward expression of emotion is sanctioned in this phase of wolf development. I still somehow convince myself I'm needed more here with them than with my husband, even though the boys answer most of my questions in monosyllables. Since I got back from the hospital 2 days ago, I have not been able to take my eyes off of them. The tourists have all left, so there are no other cars on the road, just a fading sun that knives through the pine trees and puts its little spell on me. I keep asking myself who I want to be for Kit and Sam and Charlie. It's a coping strategy I read about in the hospital last week. Who do you want to be for the people who need you? Kit told me last week he didn't know who he was anymore now that he couldn't fish. The newspapers write about all the real estate money pouring into our state and how good the restaurants are. But most fishermen I know are selling their trawlers and fending off lenders. I began making a film about this a year ago. How almost none of the fishermen here can afford to fish anymore. It's my 4th documentary. You think you know me, I say to the boys, but you might not know all of me. Oh, we know you, Mom, Sam said, and rolled his eyes like I'm a nut job. Mom, please, Charlie says. He's trying to sound like he and I are the adults in the car. He had debate team today, and the button-down shirt he's wearing is permanently scarred with wrinkles. The look is young, mad scientist. I love this song and the boys in this car being forced to listen to this song. I turn it up really loud like I used to when I was a different person and did not have 2 wolves. The contract you make when you're with a fisherman is that he will go fish. Kid has left me on our island to fish almost every week since I married him. But he'd been gone 3 months before the accident, and I think the boys and I have missed him so much we cannot say. The whole crew was badly injured in the explosion. Kit's cousin Dyer, plus the 2 younger guys and the woman with the tattoo hired to be the cook. All of them got serious burns and broken bones, but Kit is the only one still in the hospital. Thank you that none of them died. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's rare to get an engine explosion and someone doesn't die. Mom, Charlie says, the voice, Mom, please. What are you doing with your mouth, Mom? Sam says, and puts his phone in his lap and stares at me. This is rare that he actually sees me. The sign outside the Grange Hall reads Bean Supper Friday at 5. With my mouth, I say. Now he's worried about my mouth. Yeah, moving your lips like that. How to talk to wolves, this is often a question. With their splotchy faces and tree bark smell and bones growing longer in their sleep. I'm singing to myself, I say, so that you can't hear me. That's strange, Mom. Please stop. Please don't do that. Please just sing normally. I don't ask Sam how I can sing normally when I'm not allowed to sing at all. For a time, it was my joke at church and at the library and at my sister-in-law candy store that my boys were not the kind of boys who would turn on me. Candy tells me the important thing is not to take anything teenagers do personally. She's 3 years older than me and is Sewell Village's unofficial mayor. She says it's a phase with boys, their need to separate. She's lived in Sewell her whole life and she has 1 boy and 2 girls. She said it's bad with the girls, but different. You know more what they're thinking. Maybe the pain of separation comes on faster and they become your friend again sooner. Boys can be harder to read. She says you have to pay close attention. They'll say they're okay when they're really suffering or have become secret delinquents. But no matter what, Candy says, no one will love you more or be meaner to you than your own kids. God, everything that I'm reading, I'm like, yep. I'm like, God, like this is like my diary. You don't know that I went to the prom with Jamie Rogers, I tell them, and we listened to this whole song on the drive home. He wore a white tuxedo. I'm trying to hold their attention because it's a glorious thing when they give it to me. The ocean follows the car like a conscience, telling me to turn the car around and go back to the hospital. Charlie stretches his legs out in the front, between the front seats. You went to the prom with someone who wore a white tuxedo, Mom? That is really cheesy. This whole Fleetwood Mac album, I say, it's so good. Never forget it. Never, Sam says and smiles, and then he changes the radio station. But I've already won the afternoon because he's talking. Okay, so that is the first 6 pages of the book. So now you get the vibe, you get the tone, right? And I would say that that is if I had to say like the main line of this book, the main lane, the main thread is that story between those 3, that triangle. I would call it a love story. And it's like done in many like comedy acts and then hard scenes of trouble. And it kind of fluctuates, right? But it's goes through the whole book. And then another thread of this book is the husband, Kit. And he's conveniently in Nova Scotia. I have to do the math. I needed him a long car ride away, but you could still get there if you drove all day. So I had to really think about that. And so that story comes and goes. And I would call it like a weave. It's maybe a braid, if it's a 3-part braid, it's a slightly smaller weave. Because I do think the boys are the stars, and Jill, the mom. And then we have I like to think, funny, slightly irreverent friend that would be another braid. Lara is kind of a truth talker, truth sayer. She says a lot of things to Jill about her life. Lara has not married and doesn't have children. She's an artist. They have gone to art school together in Portland. Jill has chosen motherhood. She has chosen marriage. Lara has not. So we get this nice kind of collision there. And there are times where Jill wishes she had Lara's. And Lara called Jill out on the assumption that married people, like they assume everybody else is married. And I think if I had to say, those are the 3 sort of major through lines of the book. So I think I'm going to wind down my sort of talking for now. I'm going to just throw it back to you all. I mean, we can go anywhere. I think I've laid down this idea of place as a very central framing device. And then this idea of motherhood, that triangle is another huge framing device of the book. And I think that's sort of the bedrock of the book. And I think that might be a good starting place for a conversation. So we could just, whatever's coming up for folks, and then we can see where we go. Yes.
I have a lot of things to say, but the first thing I want to say is you connect the reader with Fleetwood Mac and the title right away, don't you?
Yes, I do.
And you talk about Is Landslide the one that we referenced then? in
I
the
do.
first- Yeah, because I
Yeah.
can't remember the name of the
Yeah.
song. Okay.
Yeah, does everyone remember that song? Probably not. It's her
Yeah, that's the
iconic
one.
song.
Yeah, okay.
Take my love, take it down, kind of on. I mean, I remember being at YMCA camp in like 6th grade, and we were doing Vespers, we carried a candle in, and we all sang Landslide. It was such seriousness. So I love that song, but the Wolves do not love that song. Charlie and Sam do not love that song. You can't use lyrics in a book unless you want to pay a fortune. And I needed to use a great deal of, I mean, I wanted to use like 3 lines of them. So I just described the song instead. But thank you for taking us right to the frame of the title, because there were 2 title options. Lily knows this very well because we talked about it a lot, and I would put it out to like vote. It was either Landslide, which seemed rather obvious in a good way, and it ended up being it was by far and away got the most votes from my publishing house and my agent. But the other one was that line that I really enjoyed reading, and I think you all heard it for the humor it was, which was, "Please just sing normally." That was close. I really like that line, but this is just like, now we're just can get right, and we can just talk about whatever we want. Landslide is big, and it's like a wonderful metaphor, right? Landslide of change in Maine, landslide of change that teenage boys undergo, landslide of change in the marriage, landslide in the fishing industry, landslide of climate change, warming waters, much harder to maintain so many things in the working waterfront. So you can just, once you land on a metaphor like that, if you're me, you're off to the races. Please just sing normally is very, very granular. It's very small. It's a very intimate, and both you could argue might work, but I think you wouldn't maybe have as much of an open door to get into the book. Please just sing normally. It would feel like the door was much smaller. How's that? Is there a part 2? Or was that good for now?
How much, like, I know that writers often don't have a say in the title of the book, so how much?
Yeah, lots. I have lots.
Yeah.
I mean, I have the great fortune of this being my 4th book with the same editor and the same house, Knopf. So really, except for my little fun experiment in photography. So I mean, she isn't going to let me choose a book title she hates, but we're very in sync. So, yeah.
Yeah,
So
so at this particular point.
Yeah.
Get to, you kind of get to pick the title.
I've picked all my titles to my knowledge. Yeah. I'm good at convincing her of things. Thank you. Yeah. What else? Irene.
I have said this to you before, but in addition to the title and the thing with Mac, what was brilliant was having the boys in the car. Yeah, because anyone who has raised boys through adolescence, if they're going to talk, it's going to be in the car. It's that shoulder to shoulder, not facing you, unlike women who want to sit at the table, look into your eyes and feel what your eyes are saying. They just shut down. But you got me immediately. I raised 2 sons in the car, the whole rate. I think every mother of sons could pick a song, could pick it was just brilliant. It was a great beginning. A great ending too, but
Oh yeah, we're back in the car at the very end. And there are a number of car rides. Thank you. That's it. Get people in contained space, and tension will ensue. Yeah. Yeah.
I just remember those parenting books I read would recommend that you talk. Like, don't broach any subjects until you're in the car.
Oh, for sure.
They can't get out.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh God, I mean, the stories we could all tell, right? The stories we can tell. They go on. Yeah.
I also have two sons and they also keep claiming, we've been raised by wolves. So
Oh, fascinating. I love that. I love mother wolf.
And my little has been down to the island, and, you know, same age and all that. But I also picked up how the boys know their mom in ways that the mom sometimes doesn't realize. And I found that true too, when I'll do something or say something or, oh, I'm not hungry, have that last piece of pie, and go like, Mom, we know you're really not, you're just putting on an act. So I think that comes out with both boys, but maybe the younger one who can be a little bit more abrasive, that sometimes when he really talks to mom, he sees her, but he's just trying so hard to be protective of his own little self-image and all that he's going through, that it doesn't come out, but he does know who she is and what a strong force she is in his life.
So well said. Thank you for calling her a strong force too. I really wanted Jill to be strong. She's under a lot of pressure, I will just say. She's having pretty much the worst 3 months of her life. So it's very intentional. I lay a lot of problems at her feet. I think a lot of women get a lot of problems put at their feet. And in the fishing industry, my God. So there's no mistaking my intentionality around the level of problem she's trying to solve for. Because how many women we all know and admire that are like putting out fires all around, right? And kind of keeping the whole thing running. I had one hysterical book club with like a group in Michigan. I remember when I was doing my Zoom book tour when the book came out. And literally they were lovely women, and they were having like a meal while I was on Zoom. It was great. They have like a thing, like a pretty fancy meal, like a big fancy dining table, and there I am. And then one of the women was like, but couldn't Jill just like take a break? Couldn't she just go have some fun? I mean, she's having such a hard time. I think she needs to go have some fun. And I was like, well, let's see. Her husband's femur broke. He's up in the hospital. Her son is smoking a lot of pot and is going to get into a lot of trouble. Like, I don't think this is her time. I was like, she's not going to go to the spa this week. It really, really struck me like this is so not her time. You know, she'll have her time, and she's had her times, and she'll get them again. But I really wanted to, I mean, it's fiction, right? Turn up the heat. She's under a lot of pressure, and she is up in that hospital, and she does read this article that does say, who do you want to be? Who do you want to be for the people who need you? And there are certain lines, I mean, if you think of it, because you're all such good readers and you all obviously love books, so you're such assiduous readers, there's a lot packed into opening chapters. A lot of it's in the blueprint for a book. That's one of my big headlines for you as a writer. The opening chapter is a blueprint. So who do you want to be for the people who need you? That will echo the whole book. So will You Think You Know Me. I mean, literally, like it was like when I read it, I was like, oh, there's that line that I love. That was like the huge important line of the book. Like a lot of these are really big, important catalysts to the whole book. No one will love you more or be meaner to you than your own kids, etc. Yeah. So I'll stop there so I don't go on a tangent if someone has anything else they want to say that takes us in a different direction.
How did you come up with the two names, Charlie and Sam? I just asked because I just.
Oh, that must be wild. Have you read the book yet? All right, well, hold on to your hat when you read it. That's really cool. That's the first time I've had this happen. I've had like someone have a Sam or a Charlie. I love those names.
Yeah, I do.
I love those names. There is a funny story though that I have to tell, which is my friend Lily, who's a writer. She and I are in a writers group together. We have been for a long, long time. And like many things in our life, there's a lot of synchronicity. So she's writing her novel, I'm writing mine, we're not sharing them. We don't share until like the end. We're not like shared progress, or I must be that we finally read something. We read a page and she reads and I read, and we have named the boys the same name. And we're kind of like, what was it, Silas? Silas. And I'm like, I mean, it's uncanny. So one of the boys, Charlie, was going to be Silas, I think. And she was like, you can have it. You can have it. And I was like, no, you take it. You take it. And Charlie was a much better name for my situation than Silas. And Silas was perfect for your situation. But isn't that funny? So, and I was so glad I could use Sam. I mean, it's just, there's just such great names. And this will allow me to talk a little bit about the fictionalizing of my own children and the boys. These boys are, I was very intentional in building these boys' characters to be pretty different from my boys. I wanted to respect my boys. They in no way asked to be fictionalized and put in a novel. And it was really important to me. I had to be able to pass like the straight face test if they were to read it. So the boys are pure, true amalgamations of like, I say like literally 100 boys that come in and out of my house in Portland. I mean, I have two, they're only 2 years apart. So their friends would overlap and but we're also near school. I mean, just probably 200 boys come in and out. And I didn't want them to be able to say like, oh, that's me. Oh, that's me. And I also wanted them to be really different. So, as they often are, but I thought Charlie he took me to scientists more, a little, and then Sam, Sam is a little more, well, and this allows me to say something about Sam. Sam is struggling. He has had a great trauma in his life. And I gave him that trauma because I think a lot of boys have trauma and they are struggling. And I think it's very often not addressed or sort of moved on from very quickly because, the most obvious reductive mythology is that boys are tough. Right? They're just tough and they can be good. So he does some stupid things in this book, but they're not enough to give him trauma. But then you learn that he has experienced trauma. So a lot of boys are going to do drugs or do stupid stuff, right? But Sam has experienced something hard. And how is he coping with it is a thread of the book. And how he's not coping with it. And I was really, I know this sounds kind of weird, but I was really glad when I realized he had this trauma. Someone very close to him has died in the book. Because it allowed for so much stuff to happen in the end where he had to kind of get more real about it and have to get more honest about it. And that was, believe it or not, kind of fun for me to write. My dream is to get boys in a room and get really honest. My boys' sort of nightmare. My boys will do that from time to time. But does that help you? I have two of this species. I use their emotional truths enormously, but these are not my boys. Does that make sense? Yeah, I thought that was important to say. Yeah. Oh, I had a friend come this summer. I don't think I've told you this. Mom, my mother's here. Intimate gathering. Martha knows many generations of my family. Remember, I'm delusionally tired too. She said, I couldn't believe she said this. She said this to my older son, and she's a dear friend, and I didn't correct her, but I had to say something to my son after she said. Apparently, so she leaves. She stays for a couple of days, and my older son says, "Well, now I have to read the novel." Because Marianne just told me it's basically a memoir. Oh. And she said to him, "Well, it's you." And she didn't. I mean, she's a very thoughtful person, and I think she just got carried away. And I said, well, that couldn't be further from the truth. And I pointed out all the things that are so not. I mean, there's no scene in this book that is true to my life, like not one, that it happened to me with my fisherman husband. I won't look over to the left, but I didn't live on Burcoat Island.
No, you babysat. And post,
Which we have hanging on the wall. Yeah. I spent a lot of time there. I look at this house from our house every day, all day. It's the most coolest house. Coolest house. Incredible house, clean sort of lines, everything, you know. But that was really actually an opportunity for me to say to my older son, oh, no, this is not a memoir and this is not you. And it was great. I kind of was able to really diffuse that. But these mythologies live around, and I think it's an area of great interest to some writers and some readers. What's true, what's not true? Are you writing a memoir? Are you writing fiction? As I've gotten older, I really let go of some of that. I particularly because I write fiction now. After starting my writing career, writing a memoir, I did write a memoir for my first book. Mockingbird Books happens to have some. But I say that because it was extraordinarily informative and changed my life to write that book. And it taught me an enormous amount about voice and about narrative pacing. And it was a book that kind of wrote itself. We were living in China for several years. I was writing about my two boys coming into becoming pretty much fluent Mandarin speakers, going to Chinese school. And I was trying to write like the feminist version of the woman goes to China with the boys and her husband. Because I hadn't read that book. There were a lot of books about men going to foreign countries and reporting back, right? And I wanted to do this very respectful, very much, I am a white middle-class woman in China, but this is what I'm seeing. I'm not like, I'm no expert on China, but in fact, I flailed at Mandarin and I have a lot of the lessons in the book. And then what happened was I ended up getting cancer in China when I was 40, and the book just took a left turn. And I did not want to write that book. And in fact, I said I was done with the book. I decided I was not going to write that book. I did not want to write a cancer memoir. And yet the book kept coming back. It kept coming back. And I was given a writing journal by my not to be named friend in the hospital. In fact, she actually had the audacity to give it to me, I think, in the hospital. And she said, you might want to write some of this down. Something to that effect. And I was like, no. And then sure enough, because so many highs and lows happen to you, and quixotic, actually very humorous moments and terrible moments. And I'm doing fine now, which is why I can share all that. And I wrote that book, and I'm so lucky to have gotten to write that book, that was my first book. But after that kind of a first book, you don't feel like you have another one of those in you. You feel like, hey, I did memoir. I have nothing more to say. Like how sort of lucky was I in a way to get to write that book. But again, as a white middle-class woman, I don't have a lot more I feel like I need to say in a memoir. Yet.
But you did in this book. Okay. I mean, not to interrupt you.
Please.
But I am. Because, you know, even though the connection, you fictionalize totally the connection, you are a woman going through how to deal with the wolves. Okay. And I kept thinking, well, she went through that too. I mean, you do.
Yeah.
And so, but it informs your narrative and it makes it authentic.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely.
I just wanted to say something about the memoir because it's such a fantastic book. And when I was done reading it, what came to me was I have just read the truth. Everything in that book was so true. It was, you were not, idealizing China or anything, and I just admire that book so much. I love it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really glad we got to that and these different books, different paths that we writers take. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you start the book before you went to China? Did you plan on writing and then?
Well, what happens is you hope you will get lucky to get material. I mean, again,
That thought was in your head when you.
absolutely.
Okay.
I had read, what had I read? I loved so much. Oh, well, there's one obvious book that I had read. Anne Lamott wrote a book called Operating Instructions,
Right.
which is the funniest, most wonderful book about raising a boy. I hope you've all read it. I mean, I would read it. I wouldn't care if you have children or have girls, or she has a boy.
I think his name is Sam.
I think it's and there are scenes where she's like, if I just left him on the porch for a little while, went inside so he could finish crying, like, could I do that? You know, she's so struggling. So Anne Lamott is at her best, hysterically funny. And I would say that's her best. I love that book so much. I've read it so many times. So I actually thought to myself, and my most optimistic mind was, what if I could do operating instructions of a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old in China? That was my model. I have forgotten that until this moment. What if I could do that humane yet funny voice? So you can imagine how much I didn't want to write a cancer memoir. You can just imagine it derailed the whole thing. But I had already written 100 pages of it in more of a operating instructions, because my boys were wonderfully authentic. Let's just say in China, like 4-year-old and 6-year-old are gold. They are gold for a book. I would just walk behind them, taking notes. I mean, I really would. We got there, and my older son, he was 6. All of it's true in the book. You would think I was making it up. He just was singing patriotic American songs a lot. Like he would just start singing like, "You're a grand old flag." It was really weird, not particularly patriotic. And then he would just announce over and over, "Well, here we are in China." Here we are in China. Over and over, like, what the hell is going on? And then my younger son was like wildly much more like eccentric. He would do 2 things, and again, you'd think I was making it up, but we had gotten into a little Johnny Cash phase, Burning Ring of Fire. He needed to hear the song over and over, and it felt so terribly ominous to me. Why in the living room running? I fell into a burning ring of fire. Meanwhile, we're in China, and there's so much smog. We're in an authoritarian state. I don't speak a word language. Like, how is this gonna go? And then he would say regularly, literally with a straight face, I knew I wouldn't like China. I told you, I knew I would like it. Now, flash forward at the end of the book, they don't want to leave. They never want to leave. They have so many friends from all over the world and from China, and they would have never left. I mean, it was just incredible.
You can't leave out that they became really fluent.
They did. They became really fluent.
Amazing.
Amazing. And they had pure tones because they learned at such a young age, and they still speak Mandarin and are still studying it. They just want to do that postscript. So that was kind of amazing. Yep. So how I'm going to weave this into Landslide is that I had learned the pathos and the humor of boys, and I wrote about it. So to Janice's great point, it was like a treat for me when I realized I could come back into that world through fiction, and I could capture the emotional truths through fiction. And again, as I said at the beginning, I'm so glad I did. At the time, it felt like, you know, as a writer, you want to do a lot of different things, and you're not sure which project you want to do next. And I wasn't sure, but it was calling to me. It was calling to me because Maine, writing about this Maine, my old Maine, was calling to me, and I wanted to capture the boys before they got too old. So I was pretty intentional about it. Yeah. Now, let me see. I don't want to keep us too long. I feel like we have maybe 5 more minutes, 10 more
Yeah,
minutes.
it's like 10 more
Okay.
minutes. It's okay if we
Yeah.
go a little over.
Okay, so we can go in any direction. You can tell I'm very digressive. So we can go anywhere.
Question, your grasp of the emotional weight of the fishing industry, of the people involved, the pressures of trying to make a living doing that. Did you have any firsthand experience? Did you gather this from your interviews that you did?
Yeah, thank you, Martha. So what I say a lot is I grew up around fishing. I didn't grow up in fishing, but you know, my father was 3rd generation Bath, and he was very also fishing was around him. His best friend from high school was a very charismatic lobsterman, and was his best friend through his life, and was extremely involved in our family. So I knew that world, and we would go on his boat regularly and spend a lot of time with him. And he was a huge personality in the best way. And then my father also just, he was, you know, it's almost hard to avoid fishing in Bath, growing up in Bath. So he had my dad had his finger in a lot of fishing stuff. And then there I was in Pittsburgh staring at the fleet of like 8 trawlers, and they would leave every morning at 8 a.m. and I mean, at 4 a.m. we're gonna say 4 a.m.
Maybe 3.
Yeah, they wake us all up, and which was great, which was wonderful, but you knew they were all heading out. And I mean, I knew so many people I knew in high school fished, or their fathers fished, or, you know, probably like you, right? You fished?
Yeah.
Well, tell us about that. What were you
I'm getting embarrassed. I worked on fishing boats in Alaska for many years, sailing fishing boats.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I felt like you just really got an incredible feeling that the weight of it, I guess, is the only word that I can think of. I mean, there's a lot of pressure to be out there every day, no matter what the weather, and, you know, making that money. You gotta make the money, you know, you gotta fish the tides, you know, you're going out twice a day. It's, you know, sleep when you can, and I don't know, I figured you must have some sort of connection.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for sharing that. No, I spent a lot of time with one fisherman in particular up in Port Clyde. And we were in touch it was probably over the course of a year, a lot, because COVID hit. So I was doing deep research with him, and then we had to put it on pause. And then I was going up, I couldn't go up and spend more time with him for a while. And it actually deepened our relationship and deepened the story. I ended up writing a big feature story on him, which was great. Thank you so much.
I'm a fan.
But well, you are a celebrity, Janice. Landslide, Janice. But what I wanted to say about that too, Martha, is, and you've given me higher praise than you know, to say that you felt it was believable, because the hardest thing is to write about something that you're so close to, and that people that you respect and live around and live with are going to read, and you're either going to pass the test or not. And I have to say the widow, tragically, of my father's best friend, when she wrote me right away and said, "I am Jill," it was the best. I got goosebumps all over me. She said, I can't believe you did it. You know, I'm Jill, and you got it." And so that was, I had pressure, right? I had a high bar, and I set the bar high, because what would be worse than writing something that missed and was shallow or stereotypical, or So in some ways, I would say in a different way than the memoir, this is my most important book to me, because it's also a testament, I think, of a time and place. Yeah.
I didn't know any of that background when I read it, and you talked at the beginning about the mother and sons, but I thought Kit. And I thought the husband-wife relationship and how you portrayed Kit, so multifaceted. I thought that was very well done as well. And his relationship with the boys and how you ended it was just well done. But it's just as much a part of it, the husband-wife and the stress that was on. People who obviously were in love.
Yep.
And got married and had children, but that was a very significant part.
Thank you.
Love story.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that and us of that too. So this is what will happen as a writer, everyone, is you'll go in with an intention to do all this boy stuff that I've spoken about, capturing the boys, all of that, which is pure delight. I mean, yes, it's hard and the days cannot go well, the writing days and such, but it was revelatory, and I know that territory, and I was learning, I was meaning making while I was writing. Did I really want to write about marriage? No. Not that, I've been married to the same person for a long time, and I have nothing bad to write about marriage, but that's a different book. So what I'm suggesting is there's a balancing act. I didn't want the marriage to take over. I just didn't, because that wasn't the book I wanted to write, but it had to have a very prominent place. So thus, again, Nova Scotia. Keep him there.
With the tattoos.
Yeah, with the girl with the tattoos, the woman. But it allowed me to have the framework of the marriage sit over the book, but I didn't have to have them in scene together all that much.
Well, I think you're really minimizing that whole thing, because I think that, you know how I feel about Kit.
Oh, she likes him.
The sexiest character. I mean, he's just so compelling. Every time he shows up, you're just like, yeah.
I agree.
I feel like that strong of the braided, really strong. And what happens when she goes, to the hospital, and what she discovers and who she discovers is there. So it it just amps up the tension. And I thought that was, a really, really important part of the book.
Thank you.
And a huge part of the engine of the book.
You're right. It is. It is. We don't want to give away too much, but there's definitely folks that haven't read it, so we can't. But let's just say there's some trouble.
Nervous.
Yeah.
Be a marriage without some.
I mean, it's a good flashbacks and kid when you're younger. And
Yeah, we do. We have a good love story. We do. And that was really fun to write, actually, the love story, because it was set also in Phippsburg. And I got to sort of do some wonderful memory trips of when I used to work in Phippsburg at the old Sebastopol Lodge. And I mean, what a great place for a romance, right? So I called it Dirty Dancing Without the Poconos. I called the lodge. I refused to call it the resort.
Right.
So I called the lodge. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, just another question. When you're building a character,
Yeah.
do you sort of come into it with some of the background in mind, or you sort of have this image of the person where they are in the story, and then you have to invent their past? Or how do you bring it all together so that, so that there is,
Yeah.
how do you do that?
That's a great question. What I might say, I mean, I think it's different for every writer and it changes in every book, truly. But my experience, because I'm sort of halfway through a first draft of the next novel right now, and I keep learning important things about the past of my characters, incisive things. They keep building, they're accumulating, and each thing that I learn informs the choices they're going to make in the forward, engine of the book. So I would definitely have a loose idea of them, very loose, and literally will write them into being.
And so are there like things that you kind of pick up in the world that's like, ooh, that would fit into that?
Yes,
could happen in their
absolutely.
early life.
Absolutely. And when that's happening, we talk about this a lot in our writers group, and Lily and I talk about it, then you're cooking.
Yeah.
You have cooking oil, because that means that the book is, things are available to you. Like, it's a great feeling. Do you write? Sounds like you understand that process though.
Well, I'm an artist, so
Yes.
I take in information.
I knew you had to be an artist. Yeah. Very cool. So and sometimes it's not available. So you're like, I want to write a book about a Norwegian pop singer who goes to Greenland and, almost dies. I'm not feeling it. I'm out in the world, and like the world's not telling me anything about this woman. Right now I'm writing about a love triangle with two women, very, very good friends, and then this man, and they're acclaimed journalists, and talk about trouble. They have a lot of trouble. And they're very available to me now. I know that the more I explore them, the more they will yield. And what happens is, if this is interesting to you and helpful, their characters become more and more defined and pixelated, distilled, and they can't stay generalized,
Right.
or you wouldn't be interested in Sam.
Yeah.
But that really happens over time. And I would argue that it happens the more you can get them talking and in dialogue, and then they'll have interiority as well. But you've got to get them around other people. I've just come off an entire week teaching a very intensive book workshop at Maine Media Workshop in Rockport. I literally came home Saturday. So I have writer teacher brain right now. I mean, it was fabulous and utterly immersive. And I mean, that is what I love to do. I do it a lot, that kind of stuff, that kind of teaching, but yeah, it's a very good question.
So what comes first? Is it the plot of the story or the characters?
Oh, goodness. I think for me, there can be sometimes a catalyzing plot event, loose one, but there's one. Something has happened and something else has happened. It can be that general, like this vaguely, I think this happened, and then I think this will happen. It can be like that. Or in this book, seems to be a central question, but there's many, but there's an act of betrayal. And I think that the act of betrayal, I knew had happened when I went to write the book. And I was like, well, what would happen to two very good friends if there was an act of betrayal? What would happen? And then right underneath that or next to that is like, well, who has the power? Who has the power in this relationship? Like there's three of them. Who has it? And really it's an interrogation of the fact that the man seems to have a lot of the power. So it's, yeah. So that's rework that. Yeah. So that's being reworked. It's being very much reworked in the novel, and he won't have all the power by the end. He really won't. So that's kind of helpful, right? So you've got these ideas, you don't know exactly what the characters are going to do. Yeah. And it's really, when it's going well, it's really interesting and it's really a jigsaw puzzle. Yeah. Is there one last question before we close it down? Are we good? Yeah. Wonderful. Well,
Thank you so much.
oh yeah.